Anushka, and I'm a sophomore at Bennett. Could you please provide your name and some of your background information about your education and career?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Katie Solomon, and I'm a managing director focused on talent management at a private equity firm in San Francisco called Genstar Capital. I've been at Genstar for about 9 years. I was at another private equity firm before Genstar in kind of a similar role, but also leading investor relations. And then did a handful of other things before that included executive search, other talent roles. And my first job out of college was in management consulting at a firm called Bain and Company. And then I think you asked about education. Was that part of what you were asking, Sonia? So I was I grew up in the Bay Area in California, where I still live. I went to Stanford for my undergrad degree, which was in American Studies. And then I did a master's in English. And then I did an MBA, all at Stanford. So I have not been very diversified in where I spent time school-wise. But anyway, that's the quick educational scoop.
Okay, and now I was wondering if I could ask you some questions about business ethics and how ethics have helped you answer questions or make decisions as a business leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it.
Okay, so my first question is, do you have a set of ethical principles that you use when faced with difficult questions or situations in your career as a woman?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think informally I do. So, some of the things that I think about are, and maybe this is pretty conventional, but, if what I did or the situation or the decision I made landed on the front page of the paper, how comfortable would I feel with that? Would I feel like I could stand by that if everyone in the world knew about something? As a parent now, I have 2 boys who are 11 and 13, and I think about, how would I explain that decision to my kids? Would they be proud of me as their parent for making that decision? Similarly, kind of how would my parents feel? So, kind of like the lens of, could I hold my head up high with a decision around people that I care about? So I think those are some of the things that I think through.
Mm-hmm. Would you be able to provide an example of a situation in your business career that you faced uniquely as a woman in which you applied these principles?
Yeah, so I as you sent these questions, which are so fascinating, I've tried to give them some thought, and and I definitely have some examples that I can speak to. Some of the things that I don't know if the response fulfills quite as much is, what about the situation is different because of my gender? And again, I, definitely have kind of pieces of advice and, things that I've kind of come across and thought through being a woman in a business that is largely male dominated, especially in private equity. But anyway, I'll share an example and then you just let me know, we can dig in or not. I have other examples if I pick a bad one. But one thing that I was thinking about, which is not like a huge macro thing, but it's like just, it's recent and representative, I think, of just some of the little things that you kind of think about day to day. So a big part of my role at Genstar is involved in recruiting and hiring, and that was the context in which I know your dad was, recruiting and hiring folks on his team years ago. And I also do some recruiting and kind of talent work for the firm that I work for, Genstar, so our own team. And a couple of years ago, we had someone that we had recruited who joined us out of business school. So this is, a relatively senior person, someone that we're really planning to invest in, that we hope will become a partner at the firm over years. And we were really disappointed because he joined our firm, and then within, I think, 6 weeks or something, a month, maybe it was really soon, he informed us that he actually had been recruited back to a firm that he had worked with years ago, like his old company, basically. And it didn't feel good at all. It was kind of a slap in the face because the person who recruited him back to his old firm was someone that we had called as a reference. And that guy was a friend of a lot of my colleagues, like a good friend. And it just kind of felt, backstabbing. It didn't feel great, but, I definitely believe that it's a long road and people make need to make the right decisions for them. And, I've maintained a nice relationship with that guy, with his firm. So, anyway, so that was a situation a few years ago. So flash forward now, just, gosh, maybe 6 weeks ago, pretty recently. And there was another person for a role like that, like this vice president role that we had gotten to know, and a female candidate actually who was very, very impressive. And she just graduated from business school. And she had committed to going back and joining another private equity firm. So she was, kind of off the market and committed, but she made that commitment like a year ago, and that was before COVID, and she was going to join a firm that was based in New York. And since then, she'd had like a very meaningful relationship with someone who's on the West Coast and done a lot of soul searching and had a lot of like personal reasons why it didn't really make sense for her to join that firm on the East Coast anymore. But she still hadn't told them that she was going to renege on that decision. And so she wanted to kind of see, is there something local in San Francisco that would be a good fit for me? And so that premise of kind of engaging with someone didn't feel that great. It felt like, gosh, like, are we kind of doing the same thing that had been done to us on the other side? That didn't feel good. But yeah, I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's totally okay.
Is my video back on? I had a notepad that I think clicked on like something on my keyboard. Sorry.
That's totally okay. You're totally fine.
Okay, and this is probably way too much detail, but anyway, to try to like rein this in a little bit. Anyway, so we went through initial discussions and we thought this candidate was great. And we did a lot of openly conversation, talking to her about, look, we don't want to be the one to kind of take you away from something that you've committed to. And she said, look, I'm not going to do that New York job one way or the other. So it's you or it's somebody else. And we did a whole bunch of back channel references. So talking to people that knew her, that had been, privy to her decision-making process, former colleagues of hers, et cetera. And we kind of got comfortable that she was a high integrity person and that she had frankly like come into the situation in a very thoughtful way and a very reflective way, and was kind of making this decision to be true to herself from more of like a long-term personal standpoint. And so we got comfortable and we recruited her, and she's joining our firm and starting next week actually. And I think kind of ethical in that, like, I've been on the other side of this, albeit a different situation. And like you could kind of look at that and say, well, was that the wrong ethical decision? Because, you talked to someone who had already sort of been committed to someone else and was going to renege on their commitment. But again, I think we spent enough time and dove into the issue with a lot of depth that we got comfortable. And when she described her decision to that firm, we said, can you make it very clear, which was the truth, that you're not reneging on them to join us, or because we pulled you away, or, kind of caught your eye that it was because of all this soul searching due to pandemic, due to personal life changes, due to being on the West Coast versus East Coast, et cetera, versus like we, stole her. And so I think, again, she, that was the truth. And she explained it in that light, and, it ended up working out and being okay. But anyway, not like a big macro life or death, ethical decision, but anyway, just something recent that I was thinking about.
My third question is, do you think that any particular business question, decision, or situation relating to women represents a difficult ethical issue?
I mean, gosh, there's, I'm sure, a ton in terms of harassment, a lot of things that have come to light, obviously, with the Me Too movement. I think, women have a lot more to navigate in terms of, when to sort of call things out or make a big deal of things versus when to kind of let things slide and not, kind of choose your battles more carefully. Again, if that's harassment, hopefully not egregious harassment, that should be more clear, or if that's feeling, that you haven't been kind of treated quite as objectively or quite as fairly, and, kind of like, where do you raise the flag, and where do you kind of be a good citizen and just roll with things? I think that's a lot that women, that people of color, that anyone who's kind of not the majority has to contend with and think about. And ethics are obviously kind of rolled into all of that. That, kind of someone who's just a mainstream, Caucasian male who represents more the majority historically doesn't have to contend with quite so much.
My last question is, do you have any advice that you could provide for me as I think about ethical issues that I might face as a young woman who will one day pursue a career?
Yeah. Think about this. I think, and again, I don't know how much of this is ethical versus sort of just general, being a woman in business type of things to think about. But if you kind of broaden that lens a little bit, I mean, I think having sponsors is really important. And I think there's been a great focus on female mentorship, but sometimes that can be a little bit more like token mentorship and less real sponsorship. And, what's kind of the big deal is having people that know you, that know your work, that really kind of are wanting to be in your corner. And that can be a man, that can be a woman. But I think, having sponsors and mentors has been a really big deal in my life. And if I kind of trace where my jobs came from, a lot, I've gotten to a lot of the jobs that I have really kind of through having someone in my corner who was going to like pound the table for me in that way. And I think, again, this is a little trickier just being a woman probably, but, relationships are so important, especially in business where, it kind of is more subjective maybe than in science or, maybe than some other fields necessarily. I think building relationships is really important. And as a woman, again, you just have this whole other thing to think about of like, well, should I just try to sort of do away with my femininity and kind of, be one of the guys or follow sports in order to like be more conversant around the table or whatever it is. And at least I've felt over time, especially that, I've been able to kind of like lean in and not lean in the Sheryl Sandberg sense of the word, but just, get really comfortable with like, this is my style and these are my interests and I'm going to kind of show up as my authentic self. And I think there's a lot of power actually in being a woman in business because I think, you often kind of get to learn a lot of things that I don't know. Like, I think women have really great relational skills and communication skills. I mean, all sorts of other, hard skills as well, but sort of differentiated in some of those ways. And I think a lot of those are really meaningful for building relationships, for, getting people to kind of have a stake in your own success, for people kind of letting down their guard and being more candid or authentic with you. And I like the fact that there's sort of a flavor of leadership that I think has become more mainstream or more valued over recent years, which I think is less kind of like the type A alpha male leadership. And I think is more like vulnerable, authentic leadership. And I feel like I've even seen that be even more and more true during the pandemic, where people are, I don't know if your dad is, but, people are at home and their kids will walk by and, they'll talk about how their families are doing. And you talk about kind of like, personal things and aging parents. And, I think it's just been like a very humanizing moment. And, I appreciate that there is kind of like a celebrated style of leadership that I think is even sort of more inclusive of both genders. So this probably had nothing to do with ethics, which I apologize for, but
yeah. Thank you so much. That was so helpful. It really was.